Well, this is pretty old school, but this is the way I do things. I've got this jig made up, and I'm building, these are the sides of the main frame, and it's basically a little jigsaw puzzle. So I'm actually doing 4 sides, which will build 2 frames. I've got 3 of them done. This is the last of the bunch. So what I do is I just lay this all out. I weld one side, and then there's, cross members, which I'll show that in the next video. To build a whole box frame system. To cut all this steel for this isn't that time consuming, you kind of mass produce it in a way. So it takes me maybe an hour to get 4 frames like this put together. And I could do it, some of the questions they get is why am I using square tubing? This is 1/8" wall, so it's fairly heavy stuff. Why am I using this? Why am I not using round chrome moly and all that? Well, you get into that stuff. You got to keep in mind that I build 6 or 8 of these trikes a year. If I was doing 6 or 8 a day, yeah, then you invest in the bending machines and the special cutters you need to conform the fit on all the joints, and probably go the next step to have robotic welders and that kind of stuff. I build 6 to 8 a year. So this is actually the way to do it. Square tubing is easy to put fixtures on, it's easy to weld, it's thick walled so that I can get some really good structural strength out of it. One of the concerns is weight. The whole conversion adds maybe 160, 170 pounds to the motorcycle weight. But it's all in the front, and it's all over the wheels, and it's all low. So the weight is actually beneficial. It doesn't really detract from efficiency and mileage as you would think. That's kind of overplayed a little bit. It does make a difference in rolling resistance and that kind of thing, and acceleration, deceleration. But once you're moving, the number one priority as far as efficiency is wind. And I've talked many times about I'm the only guy who builds these things with the idea of some aerodynamic stability and efficiency. And I can say I'm the only guy that builds it that way because I'm the only guy who builds reverse trikes right now. I'm the only company that's doing it right now. So whatever I do is the only way it's being done. Which is it's kind of like being the first person on Mars. Whatever you do, you're the first person to ever do it, and you're the only person who ever does it. Anything I do on reverse trike conversion right now is the only way it's ever been done, and I'm the first guy to ever do it, I guess. Kind of weird how that works out, but anyway, I'm going to get these all welded up, and we'll move on. I'm out of gas. Well, it appears I was going to pull the gas tank, but it's still got pretty good pressure, so I think I can get a few more welds out of it. I cut all these pieces here, which are 11.5 inches long exactly. So my frame width is 13.5, and that measurement came about because of the way it fits the width of most motorcycles. So I've got this jig here. These things are right and lefts. So on one side, I grind all the mating surface welds. I would grind them down so that these things don't have to work around the welds. And I put in the 2 bottom pieces. I got this special jig. It's got these uprights here that hold it so that it's fairly square, and it's really important that I get these things squared up because everything is built off of these. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and tack these bottom ones. I'll get the top ones in, tack them, and then I do cross measurements and everything and tweak it till I get everything good and square, and then I'll weld her up. So, at this point, we'll do a cross measure. Wow, that's within a 64th of an inch. I call that one good. So there we have the box frame. All right, that guy's good and solid. So what comes next, there's an angle that goes across here, there's a bracket here for the steering head, there's arms that stick out for the shock mounts. There's brackets that are going back here for the attachment to the adapter. There's hinges on the bottom that go for the hood. So, and then there's brackets obviously here for the A-arms. Then I got to drill holes, but I do those after it's all done. So, this is one frame that is roughed in position. Well, here's the next step in the process, is these shock mounts. This is actually cold rolled steel. Because of the stress on this, it's going to be pushing up in this. You don't want this to bend. So this is a really high tensile strength steel. This one's basically done. As you can see, it's all welded up and everything. So I'm going to set up the next one here. And here again, you got your little jig that I kind of came up with. They are not centered in here. They're actually back a little bit because the top A-arm is behind the bottom one that gives you the caster. So it's really critical that these are placed in the right spot so that the shock actually sits in the middle of the A-arm. If it didn't, we would have trouble with it interfering with the movement. The shock would be hitting the A-arm. So I put this rod on top of here to make sure that these are straight and in line with each other. One clamp faces forward, one backwards, so they counteract each other. Get them in there good and tight, make sure they're good and straight and level, which they are. And then we'll go ahead and tack them in place. So now we can take this all off. We don't lose that. And then this guy, yeah, that looks good. And then the struts go in here, just like this. It pretty much comes right up to where this widens out, so I get a nice fill weld in there. So that looks pretty good. So I'm basically just kind of tacking all this together. These get welded on the bottom, so it gets a little extra welding. But when this thing's all done, all these welds that you don't see are done here. I go through the whole thing and weld everything up. I think there's around 120 welds on here that I have to finish up. So I'm not even close to done yet. Okay, so those are done. Shock mounts are done on both of them. So the next thing is I'm going to do the bracket down here that holds the steering, the lower steering bearing in place. We'll get going on that. So I got some parts to cut up here. All right, I screwed up there. For some reason the camera shut off, so I didn't get this on video of how I put this the steering mount in here. So I make up these two pieces. They're 3 inches by 6 inches, and I weld those together. I use a little piece of angling that's at a 90 degrees, so I get those nice and square. I've got a little spacer here that I set here to get this angle in the right position. And then these are spaced at 2 1/4 inches apart, and that's just welded in. So that's really all that kind of entailed with that. The next step is using this little template here. I'll make 4 of these, and they sit right here, just like that. This one sits about mid here, and then there's a bracket that goes in here. This will be shifted forward to these. So when I get these in here, this will end up directly dead center between these brackets. And you can see these will be off center, because this one's going to be in the middle here. This one's going to be flush with the inside face here. So this is back just a little bit, so the shock comes right through the center of that A-arm. So I'm going to go ahead and get these guys put together. I always do one before the other, so I make sure I got it down where I don't show you how things get screwed up. Got the brackets on for the top A-arm mounts. This one's done. And we'll get this one in place. So I did cut these little blanks, drilled them out. I have to hone the hole a little bit so that the shaft will fit in there. This is actually the exact same width and same material and everything that the A-arms have. So I use this as the template for building not only the A-arms but also setting these brackets in place. So, get these on here. I'm put my clamp on here, and I clamp it snug, not tight. I don't want to compress it, otherwise I'd have a real hard time getting the A-arm in there. But it does have to be tight enough where it holds it in place. And you got to do a little coordinated on this, because I got to get my hand in here like this and get it lined up. And the way I line this up is this front one, I make sure the inside face of that bracket is even with this upright. And then the back one, I sight across the top of this to make sure that the air gap that I see through here is consistent, which means it's square. And I'm going to tack top and bottom before I pull the clamp off so that these don't bend. There. And now I can release this, pull these pins, and this will roll right out of here. So they're in place. I'll set the other side here. And then I like to weld those, finish weld them right away. I don't want to get them bumped and have them knocked out of alignment. So certain things here I finish weld. The rest of it I'll do, I'll spend a couple hours just going through these things, welding everything, making sure every single weld has been taken care of. Because once it goes in the powder coat oven, it's really, really hard. I weld these a little bit different. On these, because it's a flat joint, I just basically go straight down the joint, trying to drive the heat through the joint and get maximum penetration there. All right. Boy, we're starting to look like something, aren't we here? Make sure I got them all. Yes, I do. So, what's next? I have to put the little pins down here for the front, the hood hinge. And then there's brackets that go back here to fasten to the adapter cradle, and that's it. Then I weld everything, grind everything. I grind these corners on these pieces so they look nice, kind of like these here. I like to chamfer these edges, just looks a little bit better. These you can't even see. In fact, very little of this. The ends of these things you can see. That's it. The rest of this is all buried, but still you kind of want it to look okay. You don't want it to look like you just kind of cobbled it all together and covered it up. We don't want that, do we? So I'm going to go ahead and make these pins. We'll get those on there, get the brackets on the back, and that'll be it for the day. Tomorrow I'll spend tomorrow morning just welding stuff, get them in the oven, and then we'll move on to A-arms and adapter frames and such. All right, there are, we have our hinge mounts there. In fact, this one needs to be tweaked just a little bit. Want to have the pin kind of sticking out so when you slide the other thing on here, it's not pinched between the frame and there. So these are done. Pretty simple thing. The hood slides in from one side. One pin is shorter than the other. And the reason for that is I can line one pin up and then get the other one lined up, and it makes it a lot easier to put the hood on there without trying to line up everything. Then when I'm all done, a piece of plastic tubing goes over the end of one of these, the longer one, which keeps the hood from sliding off. These flap discs are, they're a lifesaver. These things, I go through a lot of those. This is the only corded hand tool I have in here. Everything else I have is battery operated. That is probably the most dangerous tool I have also. Had a few injuries due to that guy. Anyway, we will stick this on. These pins then slip in here to get the spacing proper. There. Looks good. Have to do a little more than tacking the nose, because when I take this thing and swivel it, I have to tap it off of here. But that wasn't too bad. The other one was a little worse. Sometimes this piece here catches on the frame. The frame is sticking down a little bit, so you got to kind of tap it off. And a lot of times it'll break those loose. So we'll finish welding those up. Look at a lot of my original, many years ago builds, I would put a bumper on the front. You notice I don't do that anymore. And here's why. I found out some of the transport companies were hooking their straps onto the bumper, and they're pulling on those two little pins there. And I was afraid they were going to snap them off. Well, if that comes off, the hood gets wrecked, everything is ruined. The other thing I figured out too is if you bump into a curb or something, it's going to do the same thing. So you're actually, the bumper actually is an impediment rather than something that helps you. You're much better off to have the wheels hit the curb first and spare the rest of it. So I haven't been putting the bumpers on for that reason for a couple of years now. The other thing I did yesterday in the afternoon is I built the adapter frame, which I use this doohickey here and lay the pieces in there, and then this just sits down in. So I got some welding that's going to interfere, but anyway, that sits down in there, and then you clamp these on the corners here to hold them upright, and that sets up the unit so it's square. And I just added this piece here. This never used to be here, but what I found is when I'm welding, this portion distorts and it usually gets narrower, which makes assembly down the road a little harder. So what I did is I just add this extra piece, and I have to drop it down because the steering column comes right through here. So it goes below the main frame cross member and above this one, so it sandwiches between. The next thing I got to do on this is right here. I got to cut this out and then weld the piece on the backside. The radiator hose goes right through here. So I got to get that done, and then there's tabs on the top here where it mounts onto the bike frame. And then I got the radiator mount and all that stuff. So there's some work to be done on this. Well, I'm about as far as I can go on this guy, which is the adapter frame for a GL1800. As you can see, I got the cutaway for the radiator hose in there. I've got the brackets on. These are the top mounting brackets. I've got the holes drilled for the bottom brackets. I've got this jig here. You know, everything requires a jig, which, there. So I basically lay this thing in here. I've got pilots here for drilling the holes. I try to mark these holes and drill them on my drill press rather than doing them by hand, but if I forget, which I usually do, then I end up flipping this thing upside down and running the drill in there and doing that. But these brackets, you know, you set the plate in here, and every one of these is uniform. And arriving at this was kind of a critical thing because there's no way the frame can be twisted or not perfectly square with the bike as long as it conforms to all the angles here. So once this goes on the bike, the arms that come in here, the margins, they'll actually be about ½ an inch outside of this. So if it's a ½ inch on each side, the bottom part of this frame is centered. These cannot really go off center. There's a aluminum beam that goes right through here. So it self-centers, and as far as tipping, I've got the arm length here, so if it's flush with the inside or this face here, they're rocking. I got to put the radiator in there. It's actually, there's two little brackets that go in here, and then there's one to hold the fan. I still have the brackets to weld on here where it attaches to the main frame, so I'm going to do that tomorrow. And all right, this is the next step in getting this frame situation together. I take the adapter, actually put these plates on here. On one side, on this side over here, I put a washer in there so that when I go to assemble this on the bike, I got a little bit of clearance to work with. Otherwise, things can kind of be tough. You have to kind of hammer things together, and that is not good. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and put a couple of clamps on here. And let's see, check the alignment. A lot of this can be done by eye. You can sight across the shallow lines, make sure you got it square. And that looks good right there. 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 Now with the washer though, you can see it's just a nice fit. And when I weld these, they tend to warp a little bit, so it'll actually tighten up a little bit more. And as I mentioned, when this is together, this tube here is down 3 inches. The steering shaft goes directly through here, and it meets with this down here. And I drill those once I get the bearings set. You know, I get it all set and I turn the steering back and forth to make sure the shaft turns true and doesn't wander, but it does go right through here, so it's important to get these in the right position.